Marketer, I'd like to begin this by engaging your mind right away. Notice the test protocol in front of me because it connects to a question I'm going to ask you. It's test protocol 1427, and we're trying to help an organization increase the number of leads generated on the home page. Now, all of this links to our topic, but for just a moment, take a look at the control and ask yourself a question. What would you do to try and improve the performance of this page? As you're thinking about that, you may not be aware of it. You're generating reasons, and these reasons should be the kernel of a hypothesis. Too often we test ideas. We're going to talk more about that going forward. But for now, put together your plan. As you're doing so, I want to warn you. I need to go through this case study at a clip that will keep us on track so that I can deliver the most value for you in a short period of time. And to do that, we're not going to break down every point or every change because it's really 2 or 3 slides that bring home the main point. So I will go through approximately 30 slides at high speed, and the goal is to densify the presentation and deliver the most possible learning. Now, with that in mind, I can tell you that we analyzed the page, made significant changes. You can see some of the critique in the slides as I'm clicking them, but what's most important is to see the treatment and the changes we made there. And here again, you can see significant changes, each one addressing problems identified in the diagnosis. And finally, you're looking at 2 pages. Or are you? What you're really looking at are 2 hypotheses. And if you think in that way, you'll get through the page and into the mind. And if you don't get into the mind, you're going to leave the upside on the table. So there is the control, there is the treatment. We have now executed a hypothesis by manipulating zeros and ones to create an illusion in the mind. And now we're going to measure the response to that, not with a focus group or hearsay or someone trying to determine or predict what they would do, but we're going to actually measure it with behavior. We call that single factorial testing or A-B split testing. And here is the outcome. Our brilliant work produced a loss in terms of performance of 24.9%. Now, you might find that that's an unusual way to start this presentation, but I can tell you that that happens regularly here. And why? Because this is not a loss, this is a win. It would only be a loss if the actual test was inconclusive or not valid. But since it was a conclusive, valid test, we were able to eliminate certain possibilities as to how someone is thinking when they interact with this page. But the question that brings us together today is how do you formulate such hypotheses so that you're not just focused on getting a lift, but you're actually capturing a precious learning. The learning is more important than the lift. The lift is just a result. The learning can be a cause. So you've got to focus on that. And to do that, I want to ask a simple question. What was wrong here? Well, we could go into the particulars of the treatment, but it's more important today to study the process. So I want you to know that when we come to a situation like this, we engage a certain tool. This tool may be helpful for you. We don't teach it in depth today, but it is in our content, and it's called the Discovery Triad. An executive comes to you and they say, how? In this case, how can we increase the number of inquiries? That's a how question. And they want you to give them an action. They want you to use that action to affect a solution. But in fact, what we really do must be different. We must combine aggressive reflection with relentless action. So the first question we ask is, what does the data tell us about behavior? Now, that behavior is still an effect. I want to get beneath the behavior to what's occurring in the mind, and so you never stop there. You must ask the why question. Why are people behaving this way? When you do that properly, you form a tentative answer that becomes the hypothesis. But how do you create rich, provocative, powerful hypotheses? It's been my experience that all over the internet we're testing, but we're not doing it right. We're throwing ideas out and we're trying them. This does not result in a customer theory, in a predictive model of the customer's decision process, and you'll not get to that holy grail unless you understand hypotheses. So what do we do? How can we make that happen? Well, let's go back to this same case study. So having discovered what we did in this first test, we now shift to another area of the site and we test a hypothesis that's different. The reason we shifted is because we didn't want to lose too much value on the home page. We found an excellent sort of side path to test where we could get a learning that we could reapply. So in this case, we took this control. We made changes around a new hypothesis. This hypothesis could not have been developed had we not ran the first test and learned something. Having learned from that hypothesis, we build this new hypothesis, and then we put the two against each other. And again, you're not just looking at 2 pages. You're looking at 2 hypotheses. And now our treatment represents a learning from the previous test combined with the reason why we might expect to see a difference in behavior that results in a financial improvement. What happened? Here's what happened. A 548% increase. Now that was thrilling to the partner, but let's be clear. Even though they achieved a 1,312% step-through increase and a 548% increase in lead capture, the volume running through this path wasn't as heavy as the home page. So the goal is to take this learning and transfer it to where we can get more impact, which brings us back to the home page again. So now we take the learning from the 2 hypotheses that we've tested. We build a new test back on the home page where we began. And you can see the control and the treatment and changes side by side. You're looking now at a piece of sophisticated science. Remember, even a 5% increase here will have more financial impact than the previous test because the volume traveling through this part of the thought sequence is so high. Ultimately, what truly happened was a change in behavior that resulted from a change in the mind. And you can see it and the way it unfolds by looking at these experiments together. Combining the hypotheses produces the ultimate prize here. And it's not the 90% left. It's an understanding of what lever to pull in the mind to achieve a new behavioral pattern. All of that leads to the scientific question that drives our time together. I don't want to impress you with our scientists. I don't want to entertain you in the few minutes that I have remaining. I want to offer you a breakthrough discovery that can change how you approach your testing program. And to do that, I have to build on something that we have spent years trying to understand. At McLabs, we've conducted more than 20,000 path experiments. I've invested 28 years of my life trying to understand, why do people say yes? And part of that process demands the development of strong hypotheses so that we can model the mind of the customer. So, how do we take this learning and apply it in our own situation? What can you learn today about the development of hypotheses that will enable you to get dramatic improvements and keep you from wasting money on poorly planned tests? So, I move into this now, and I almost apologize in advance for my intensity. It's because I'm passionate about this. Marketing as a word has negative connotations, and frankly, I find the whole idea boring. What I'm interested in is what marketing truly stands for, and that is the fostered conclusions that occur in the mind and how we stimulate change of behavior. I'm interested in the psychology that drives decisions and the implications of that for my life and for yours. So to help you learn today, I'm going to suggest just 3 key principles from our testing program. 3 things we've learned from running 20,000 experiments. First one is this. A hypothesis anticipates the answers to research questions. And most importantly, it should follow a 4-step framework. Now, we developed this framework because even when we taught the importance of hypotheses, students struggled with a way to build a hypothesis that produced the highest and best learning, and thus, eventually, the highest lift. So I want to take a real example from our case studies, and I want to build the hypothesis with you and teach you how to approach it so you can take it back and apply it. And you'll notice there are 4 key words on the slide in front of me: if, by, will, and because. Those are pointer words, very critical in the grammar of hypothesis development. And I'm going to unpack them and then show you how we built this hypothesis. All right? So the first word is if. Now the if is the hinge. And it is a summary description of what you're trying to do. And if you can't summarize it in a few key words, you probably don't understand it well enough. So we need it as the lead in this evolution of the hypothesis. And I'll show you how we develop one. In this case, we had done data science for this remarkable discovery. What you're going to see on the left side is the treatment for a dialysis device that really can set a patient free. You don't have to go to a clinic. You can use it in your home. You can even go on trips, which many patients cannot do if they have to time their dialysis with the location of a clinic to get help. My point for you is we were trying to understand how to best communicate that we had a remarkable solution that could truly help you. But we discovered by reviewing the data that we tended to get a stronger response when we emphasized this remarkable machine itself. Now, marketer, you know that that could be wrong. In some cases, we're told, the resulting customer experience. In some cases, we're told, emphasize the benefits over the features. There's lots of marketing speak and truisms and principles that work in some situations and not in others. But we found from the data that people need to see the machine. I think they're trying to conceptualize the solution. Now, do you see my words, I think? This is leading to this development of a hypothesis. I'm trying to understand what's happening in the mind. That's where all the upside truly exists. So keeping that in mind, we have to come up with a by statement. What is that by statement? The by statement is critical because it delineates the change, the nature of the change we're going to make in our messaging. And that change in messaging is designed to foster a new set of conclusions that point to a better decision. How do we do that? Well, it brings me to the second principle. There are only 3 ways to improve performance in your messaging. You can remove something, you can add something, you can change something. In our situation, we thought about which one of these combinations we should do, and to do that, we went back to something many of you have learned called the conversion sequence. If you don't know what this is, we developed it nearly 20 years ago in our lab. We've taught it all over the world. We can give you a link after this presentation where you can learn it. But this is a heuristic for seeing through the eyes of a prospective customer. And you'll see it's focused right now on a negative in the messaging. That's those elements which cause friction and anxiety. So we either want to remove friction, remove anxiety, or at least change something to minimize it. That's the negative side of a fulcrum. And that fulcrum sort of represents the cognitive calculation that takes place when you decide yes or no as you consider an option. Now, for a moment, if I'm losing you, if this feels a bit too technical, just relax, because at the end of this presentation, I'm going to give you a link that will explain this in detail, and you'll still be able to use what you learned today, combine it with that to get remarkable results. But let's keep going. Now you'll notice I'm focusing on the value side. And see what I'm trying to do in the mind? I'm tipping the fulcrum in favor of value. And I'm doing so by emphasizing the clarity of the value proposition and leveraging incentive. So again, the second question is, what can we remove, add, or change to intensify perceived value? This combination, these 2 questions, allow me to understand what it is I need to change and how it connects to my hypothesis. Here is step 3. What can we remove, add, or change to leverage motivation? That is the factor they bring to this conversation. That is how motivated they are before I even speak to them. And that has a high impact on conversion. 3 questions. You can ask these 3 questions in order to fill out this simple part of the hypothesis, the by feature. So in this case, here's what we said. By focusing the image on the machine, that's that's a change. And then focusing the headline on the machine, that's a change. And then focusing the body copy on the machine, that's a change. We're hoping something else is going to happen. And I'll describe that in a moment. But I want you to know that all we could have said here was that we were going to add something, remove something, or change something. We chose to focus on changing. And this is because it best allowed us to accomplish the move in the mind that we're trying to achieve. So then, we thought in this hypothesis that by changing these things, we could increase click-through on this page. And if they don't click through here, there's no hope of converting them into a customer. So if, by, will, just stop for a moment. Start to think about something you're working on in your own marketing efforts. In the end, all you can do is add, remove, and change. So if you do something by add, removing, and changing, what will it produce in terms of a difference in results? Now, you might stop right there. You might say to yourself, this is it. I understand now, and this is great. I can use this. But you're missing the most important part. Because the goal of this experiment isn't simply to drive a difference in dollars. It's to understand something profound about the customer, which is why the because factor is so important. And it brings me to the third and final principle I'm trying to teach today. Ultimately, the test is underperforming if it doesn't lead to an insight about the customer. The insight about the customer is more important than the lift. The learning is more important than the lift. If we get the right learning, we can get the maximum lift. Sometimes, some of us are satisfied with the element in our marketing that is actually costing us the most money. You say, what do you mean? Well, if you got a lift recently, and let's suppose you got a 20% conversion lift, and you're thrilled, and you check that off the list, you may not realize that you had the potential of getting a 50% lift. And that 30% difference is hidden. And for that reason, you lose 30% every single day, and you don't even know it. Peter Drucker said, adequacy is the enemy of excellence. So, how do you overcome that? Well, by learning enough about the customer's mind, by building a predictive model that enables you to maximize your impact. That's why this next piece is so important. You've got to use the hypothesis to build a robust customer theory. A customer theory is a model of how the customer selects, how they choose. Its value is its coherence. And its coherence enables you to predict behavior. If it cannot be used to predict behavior, then it's insufficient. Ultimately, the whole point of a testing process is to link the findings until you have a picture, a simple, coherent picture of how the customer chooses. And with that, you can start to build in your because factor. Customers are more interested in conceptualizing the device. Now, that's just a simple point. That's why it fits into a design of experiments to be integrated with a whole group of points until you have these nodes connected and an understanding of the network of thoughts that produces a customer from a prospect. The if, the by, the will, and the because all come together to help you achieve this point. And so, if you put these together, you'll be able to drive a holistic result as opposed to a sort of test an idea and hope for the best approach. Now, we have built a criterion. Once you've built your hypothesis, a checklist, and it's broken into two parts. And you can use this checklist against your hypotheses. So with it, you can see if you've actually accomplished what you need to with the development of that four-step sort of process. The first question is, does the hypothesis specify the primary changes you're making? Does the hypothesis indicate the variable set? You know what the variable set is. There's variables and values. Variable is the headline. The value is the red color, green color. Or it could be the words, but it's the thing you change in the variable. Third question, does the hypothesis define the desired result? What are you trying to achieve with it? If you don't do that, you really can't do good science. And the fourth question is, does the hypothesis culminate with a customer insight? In the end, what do you learn if this test produces a lift? We all know that question is important, but we sometimes forget the importance of this question. What do you learn if the test doesn't produce a lift? Now, the value here is either way, this test itself produces great benefit as long as it's valid. It's by integrating the findings that you produce the remarkable upside. Then there's a sort of excellence criterion. Does the hypothesis have the potential to produce high impact? Sometimes we test incrementally when we should be testing categorically. What do I mean? Well, if you have the wrong approach, you can refine it and refine it and refine it, but you're never going to see dramatic impact because it's the wrong approach. You may be testing short copy when you should be testing long copy. You may be testing a chart when it should be a letter. You may be testing a design and trying to incrementally improve it when it should be a complete redesign. Sometimes the best thing to do in our marketing is to light a fire and burn down what we're trying. Otherwise, we settle for anemic results and we don't understand what we could be achieving. Here's another question. What is the potential cost of not testing this hypothesis? If the cost isn't really high, maybe you don't need to run this test. And then I think this may be one of the most important questions I bring to bear here. Did you generate multiple hypotheses and select the best, or did you just get one good idea and try it? Until you generate options, you really can't evaluate the options you select. So in every case, you need to ask two questions. What am I trying to accomplish here? What's the highest and best objective? Number one. And number two, what is, and this is very important, the most effective way to accomplish it? And when you put most effective into that sentence, you force yourself not to come up with a way, but to struggle for the best way. And to do that, you need to generate multiple options. So let me just suggest this to put it all together. I'm trying to help you understand the importance of a hypothesis. I'm trying to help you see a four-step process that you can use to build a valuable hypothesis. And then I'm offering you a way to connect that to the holy grail of marketing, which is a customer theory. And to that end, we'll let you get these checklists. You can download them. We'll also help some of you that may have tuned in here and thought, you know what, I just need to get a lift right away. This is something I taught before. I'm going to give you a link to it. It's on a video. We're teaching minor changes that produce big results. And there's 5 practical principles you can apply to your current pages in order to get a dramatic impact. In the meantime, I want to thank you. And I want to invite you to be a part of our communities. We constantly push the envelope and try to understand, why do people say yes?